There's a secret world just outside the hospital walls where clinicians trade stethoscopes for startups. If you've ever wondered how someone goes from seeing patients to building the future of healthcare, you're in the right place. I'm Kayla, a PA on a mission to figure out what comes next. When I started researching careers in health tech, I found confusing job titles and zero clarity on how clinicians actually made the transition. So I went straight to the source, the people who already did it. Each week, we demystify a specific career path by someone who's already living it, whether it's from the bedside to the boardroom, the startup, or something completely different. Whether you're planning your exit, passively curious, or already working in health tech, this is your insider's guide. Welcome to Corporate Espionage. Today, I am so pleased to welcome Laura Demuth. She joined Curology as a nurse practitioner and employee number 12 in 2015, when it was just a little telehealth dermatology startup called Pocketderm. 9 years later, she's naturally grown into the role of Senior Vice President of People and Patients, blending leadership of culture, medical licensing, and customer success. In addition to her work at Curology, she also co-hosts the Mighty as a Mother podcast, which explores the intersection of motherhood and career, two of her passions. She advises health tech startups, and she earned her executive MBA along the way. So needless to say, Laura is a busy, busy woman. Thank you so much for sharing your time with me today. I'm really excited to talk to you.
Thank you, Kayla. I'm so excited to be here.
Absolutely. Okay, so typically I like to start at the beginning of someone's journey, but I thought that it would be kind of fun because your day-to-day is just so crazy. I mean, we just talked about the fact that the week is always crazy and things are always changing and running at a pace of 1,000 miles per hour. So I would actually like to start at the present day, and I think we can work our way through the past. So I'd love if you could just introduce yourself to our guests. Tell us a little bit about your current role. What do you oversee? How big is the company? What do you do?
Sure. Oh my gosh, I could probably talk for hours about that. So, like you mentioned, Laura Demuth, I am the Senior Vice President of People and Patients at Curology. We are about a 12-year-old dermatology telehealth company with a consumer skincare brand as well. So, we treat things, very simple dermatology diagnoses like acne, rosacea, fine lines and wrinkles, hyperpigmentation, things like that. And we have a 503 licensed compounding pharmacy that compounds our topical treatments that we ship direct to patient. And then we have a medical provider, clinician who's attached to each patient's care, follows them longitudinally throughout and makes adjustments based on whatever life is bringing them and whatever their skincare goals are. We were originally founded on the mission of making effective skincare accessible. I grew up with acne and did not have access to probably the most effective treatments. I was left to my devices with drugstore brands and things like that. And I remember sitting down with the co-founders and looking at the initial prototype of the electronic health record and the model. And I said, gosh, where was this when I was a teenager? So that's been very true for me. I've been here almost 11 years, actually. So in April, I think it'll be 11 years. And the same reason I walked in the door all those years ago is the same reason I'm still here. I've just kind of amassed different teams and responsibilities and such. And, I sit down and interview folks that are thinking about joining Curology. They kind of look at me like, what does this title mean? I don't really understand. So I usually take the first few minutes to explain to them exactly like what my trajectory has been and what my role is. And so at Curology, I started off as a clinician. I am a nurse practitioner and I was seeing patients, but in very early startup days, you wear every single hat and all the hats that are not even given to you, but the hats that you seek out and find and see where the solutions need to be had, and putting, yourself into those solutions if you can. And so along the way, I had the privilege of scaling our clinical team. And once we got our Series B funding, scaled that up to about 150 clinicians from the three of us that were initially hired, a variety of credentials. We have NPs, PAs, physicians, and a few nurses as well. Also started working with our medical licensing and regulatory department. And so we have a small but mighty team that's responsible for, because we're a nationwide telehealth practice, all the state licensure as well as the national certifications and things like that. Customer success, which at Curology is our other patient-facing organization. And so there's a lot of synergies behind what our clinicians are doing, and then also the care that they're receiving from someone related to their billing or their shipping or, various other questions that are not clinical in nature. And then my last, but arguably one of my more important hats is that people piece. So I also run our people and culture team, small but mighty team at Curology. And that has been like the biggest left hand turn, but also like the
Hmm.
biggest blessing of my career, truly, because it has been one of the most rewarding, challenging, intellectually stimulating, all the things, pieces of the puzzle that I didn't know was missing. So I also am responsible not only for our patients and our providers, but all of our people at large. And so bringing that care that we give to our patients, the care that our medical providers are known for, and making sure that all of our employees across all of our entities feel that same level of care. And now managing all those different things, also serving on our executive leadership team with some really amazing colleagues. Every single day is different challenges. So, like you mentioned before I hopped in, I was like, I'm coming in hot. I'm a little bit late. That's just my name of my game today. And I'm sure everyone who's listening who has had startup experience can relate to that for sure.
Absolutely. Just out of my own curiosity, can you dig a little
Yeah.
bit deeper into the people aspect? So, when
Yeah.
I think people at a company, I first imagine someone in HR.
Effectively, yes. It
Okay.
is effectively HR. So we call it people and culture, PNC, at Curology. And so, yes, people processes. So I have a team of a few individuals who have spent their careers in HR, who are really, really skilled at all the work that they do and are also very passionate about, delivering those types of services to all of our users, are our employees. And so is managing things like performance review cycles. It's interviewing and hiring, which is one of my favorite things to do, is bring people into the company that I love. And it's, talent management and compensation and benefits and employer brand, all the things that are kind of wrapped up and many, many more that I'm probably not coming to the top of my head. But yeah, all of that wrapped up into my role as well.
Sounds
Yeah.
like a lot of, well, we don't need to understate the fact that you wear a lot of hats and have a lot of responsibilities, but it also sounds like a lot of, yeah, information storing at all times and a lot of change.
Totally. And change is the name of the game. It's so interesting because when I introduce myself to new people at Curology or I'm interviewing, they're like, oh my gosh, you've been there all these years. Like, tell me about what it's been like. And I'm like, oh gosh, in a startup, you are a different company every 3 to 6 months. And
Yeah.
so it's almost like I've had my change bucket fulfilled so much at this one organization because I'm someone who does thrive on change. I am not thinking that we will stay the same as we are today. In fact, we can't stay the same as we are today. How are we going to get better in 3 months, 6 months, a year, 5 years, 10 years? And so, yes, change has been the name of my game for a very long time here.
You mentioned that you do a lot of the interview process for Curology for, I'm assuming, both clinicians and non-clinical folks on the team. I would guess that change, being inviting to change is something that you might screen for.
Definitely.
How do
Yes.
you think, like, is there any way that people can kind of reflect for themselves and make a true decision about whether they are okay with that level or change or not?
Yes, I think it sometimes takes getting into that interview conversation, especially for people who have not worked in startups before, but maybe startups seem exciting or um, really just something different because they're coming from a big company. And I think sometimes it takes getting into the weeds with an interviewer of like, what does that actually mean? We are operating at an incredibly fast pace because we can. We don't have a ton of red tape. We don't have a lot of layers to kind of work through the same way that someone at a large healthcare organization has, could be months and months before you make a protocol change, for example, if it
Yeah,
comes to patient care. So
totally.
sometimes it takes getting into the weeds of exactly the pace of change, i.e., I could decide something with my leadership team at 9 a.m. Pacific, and we could enact that change by, I don't know, 9:05 or, something really, really rapid, and using examples that way. I also like to dig into that and understand from the candidate's perspective what their experience with change has been like, because I think it's very easy to say, great with change, or I love change. But really, when you ask more pointed questions about, tell me about a time, or, and then you listen for things like, okay, is this a change that happened to them? Is this a change that they helped lead? It's all very
Yeah.
different depending on what your perspective, where your seat is in that. And change management is an art as well as a science. There's, no one size fits all. And I've learned that in my time at Curology, depending on what type of change I'm trying to enact, my approach for myself, my approach for my leadership team, all has to be very different and very specific to the type of change that we're trying to drive that time.
Most definitely. Yeah. And even the way that you communicate changes in different ways, like you said, to
Yeah,
those respective groups
sure.
of people. Yeah.
Totally.
On the topic of change, this might be a great segue to talking about your early days with Curology. So I would love it for you to give us a little bit of insight and kind of paint the picture for us of what sparked the interest in this telemedicine company before that was like really the mainstream. What was going on and how did you stumble upon this company, Pocketderm?
Oh my gosh, such a great question. I feel like it was yesterday. So registered nurse practitioner. I'm originally from upstate New York. I'm currently talking to you from San Diego, California, where I've been for the last
I am
almost
so
12 years.
jealous.
I think it might be a little colder where you are right now.
A little
Um,
bit.
so I won't shout that too loud. But yeah, so life brought me from the East Coast to the West Coast. I had worked in a variety of clinical settings. Like I was a bedside nurse for a number of years and in inpatient hematology and oncology. I learned a ton from that experience. One of the things I learned was that I didn't want to become a bedside nurse for the next 30 years, even though I met a ton of them that were just amazing.
Yeah.
So I went and got my master's degree while I was doing bedside nursing, so going to school part-time and working full-time. And I thought if I just get into a clinic where I can work Monday through Friday, 9 to 5, I have these very structured hours, very limited call, I'll have made it. I'll be good. And then of course I graduated, got into internal medicine. I got into the grind of 30 patients or more per day and a lot of acute issues that, the modern American healthcare system is not very well equipped to handle. I was staring mostly at a screen and not very much at my patient. And I fell out of love a little bit of why I went into medicine in the first place. And then fast forward to life bringing me out to the West Coast here, I started getting to immerse myself more in experiences like biotech and pharma and startups, just learning what do people do out here? Because I was in, suburban upstate New York, certainly not in the city where there's a lot of activity happening. And so I met the co-founders, Nancy and David of Pocketderm, now Curology, and their mother and son dermatologists. And I learned about the founding story and how David was a resident and he was thinking about, different ideas that he had to make things better. He had graduated and was working in New Mexico, rural New Mexico. Patients were traveling in 5 hours to come and see him, taking off
Wow.
work, taking kids out of school, only to get to the pharmacy after a very simple exam and a few prescriptions because sometimes it takes multiple prescriptions for acne treatment. And then they couldn't afford their medication at the pharmacy. And then,
Oh
all
my
is kind of
gosh.
lost there. And he said there has to be a better way. And me being someone who dealt with acne as a kid, certainly to not to that extreme, but I said this resonates with me so much personally, professionally. I watched them show me the early electronic health record with a few keystrokes and clicks, which we've optimized so much over the years, even since that time. But I was like, this is 2015, like you said, before the pandemic, before telehealth was actually a thing. And I just was like, I have to do something new and different and innovative for my career from now until forever. Like I'm not going back. And I jumped in with both feet and I didn't even fully understand what a startup was. Silicon Valley wasn't this like elusive, crazy thing that everyone now knows it to be, at least during those
Yeah.
years. I was, coming from mainstream healthcare. How different could it be? Well, it turns out very different. We spent our days, we were never remote in those early days here in San Diego. We were all here. We worked hybrid, but we had a little lab where we'd mix the medications and then we'd sit and with our dermatologist colleagues and learn just side by side and learn and soak up all their knowledge, see the patients that come through, but also contribute to things like social media and blog posts and marketing materials. And I loved getting to use both sides of my brain to be able to further this business. And that's, kind of what I've been doing ever since. But yeah, those early days are really fun. They're fun to look back on.
No doubt. I feel like I've had the awareness of Curology for at least 6 or 7 years. No doubt.
That's awesome to hear. I'm so glad to hear it. Yes.
Yeah.
We were founded in 2014 and I joined in 2015.
Yeah. Okay. So the EMR system couldn't have been that great at that time. I think I was using eClinicalWorks
Oh,
in an ophthalmology clinic at that time, and it was like not great. It was pretty dinosaur.
awful. Yeah. And it's, Epic. I think I was using Epic or Allscripts or things like that. And there was so many. workarounds or things that didn't make sense or fields that didn't make sense. So it was also really cool about the early days that one of the co-founders who happened to be David's brother and Nancy's other son, Glenn, was also our CTO. And so he had an engineering background, and we literally were able to sit side by side with our engineering colleagues and say they could watch us work and say, you know what, I'll just make this tweak because this will make you more efficient. This will make you faster. So we've really gotten it to a point where our clinicians are efficient. They love the electronic health record that we've been able to develop. They feel like it's helping and not hindering their care. And with
That's amazing.
asynchronous
Yeah,
care, yes. I mean, that's a feat for any healthcare clinician who's listening. I mean, we have love hates with our electronic health records, but with the asynchronous model of telehealth, we're able to basically see the patient and chart at the same time. So you don't have that, you know, my gosh, I have to take this home and have all these charts to do. It's all happening all within the medical chart at once, which is a really beautiful piece of telehealth.
definitely. I'm amazed at how much EMR systems have changed over time. I am currently integrating into a new tech stack at a new job, and I am hopeful that my experience with EMRs in the past can help the company to improve our EMR system. I'm stoked about it, in fact.
I love that. I just want to address that because I think that's really important. And I know that you feature a lot of clinicians who are trying to break into telehealth or health tech or what have you from traditional healthcare settings that may not know exactly how to do it. I think, Kayla, what you just described, that mindset is really key of I'm hired to do a role, but like I'm already thinking about how I can make this better and use my skills and expertise to be able to, see patients faster, make the quality of care better. And the mindset that you have is exactly what I think others who are listening, who are thinking they want to get into this biz should think about and really stretch themselves to think big if they're considering their next role.
Yeah, thank you for that. I completely agree. And that's definitely something that as painstakingly optimistic person that works in healthcare that like believes that we can have the tools to make things really great. That's definitely something that I always try to help out with. So thank you. On the topic of mindset, I'm quite sure that switching, settings so dramatically again before it was a big thing, before it necessarily was common mainstream that a lot of people wanted to do it. I'm sure that you probably face some internal and maybe even external challenges of your personal mindset when you made this transition. What were some of the things that you struggled with along the way?
Yes, that's a really great question. And I always told myself I can go back. Like I have my licenses, I have my skills, I can go back. Very quickly, I was like, I'm never going back. This is for me in some way, shape, or form. But that's my choice. I know that that's not everyone's. I have clinicians that work for us here that still moonlight in person to keep their skills up. So I definitely had a little bit of soul searching to do. I had colleagues, old colleagues, and then also my family who were like, are you sure you're going to like hang up your stethoscope and your lab coat and
Yeah,
just hang out on a couch with your laptop and eating snacks. And I'm like, yes, yes, absolutely I am, because I can do all of that and then also have a much broader impact than I ever could being one singular provider in a clinic. So I knew that that's how my mindset was at the time. The external factors as well, fast forward to like our Series B when we started to say, oh my gosh, we got to hire all these clinicians. I remember, just kind of trying to figure out how do I post a job? How do I find people that wants to do this? Especially we weren't remote. We were in the city of San Diego. I remember doing so much cold outreach and trying to convince clinicians, number one, this is real and not a scam. Like this is an actual job and these are things that we do. And that the medical care that we provide is not only legal, but it's far and above, what a lot of people in common dermatology practices will get for these particular conditions level of care. So I remember just kind of like pulling people in like this and just hoping people were going to say yes. And now fast forward to 2026, I get outreach all the time. When are you going to be hiring clinicians again? I want to work for Curology. I know I've heard the clinician experience is really great there, and so it's really interesting to see how that's evolved since the telehealth has become more mainstream. And also, since clinicians have more years under their belt to, have a little bit more burnout or just wanting something different. And we're now at a point that's really exciting in healthcare where there's a lot of options for clinicians to do different things. And I love being at the forefront of being able to offer that for people as well.
certainly. What are some of the most common comments that you hear from clinicians who you interview of why they want to either continue along the path of practicing a telemedicine-based platform or transitioning?
That's a really great question. So for those who are in telehealth currently and don't, like myself, don't want to leave, I think there's a lot of different ways to think about why they might want to stay. One is the speed at which we're able to see patients in a really good way, and I mean, not in a rushed way, a very high quality bar, but because we're able to build our proprietary electronic health records, so there's not all this fluff or things that we don't use, and it's all very patient and provider specific. We're able to deliver that high quality care, very personalized care, very quickly. So that's really nice for providers to be able to be that effective and impact that many patients positively, far and above what they would ever be able to do in an in-person clinic setting. I think companies like Curology, many other companies that are in health tech, are innovating very rapidly. If you're coming from a large healthcare organization, you might not see that same level of speed and innovation. And so I find that some clinicians find that really exciting. Curology happens to be a business that has physical products in addition to our digital care. So we have our prescription lines, we have multiple other non-RX and OTC products that sit on shelf in retail like Target and Walmart. And our clinicians have a hand in developing that. What are you seeing? What are the patients asking for? What kind of combinations do you think would work best from an active ingredient perspective? And so we actively seek that out. And so they have the opportunity to contribute in other ways, similar to how you're thinking about the electronic health record, how to make this better. Many, many health tech companies will be able to afford their clinicians different ways to make the business better or their product better or their service better, which I think is really rewarding for
Yep.
clinicians who might feel stuck. And I think I'd be remiss not to mention also, many telehealth roles are remote or hybrid. And so that we're not as beholden to like how when I graduated with my master's and became an NP, like, oh my gosh, my dream was to just work Monday through Friday in an office.
Yeah.
And now that's not as much my dream. We're hybrid in San Diego, which I still love. We get the benefit of coming in, collaborating, seeing each other. I have a team that just genuinely enjoys being together, not only the clinicians, but our other San Diego employees. But we still have the flexibility to do things that you may not be able to do if you have a full clinic schedule and you're booked out for months. There's a bit more of an ebb and a flow, and it gives clinicians a little bit of their autonomy back as far as their personal lives as well. So I think there's a lot of reasons why someone might want to stay in telehealth or get into telehealth going forward.
So, talking about the transition from a clinician going from practicing in person in a hospital setting, in a clinic setting, to a telehealth setting is one thing. However, talking about a clinician going from practicing clinically, seeing patients, treating patients, diagnosing patients, working at the bedside in any of these settings, to working non-clinically, assuming leadership, assuming more responsibility, getting dirty in the world of maybe a startup or maybe a larger organization, and taking on just more non-clinical roles is a completely different thing. I'm curious if you can share more about your journey with Curology and how those opportunities opened up. And before I open the floor to you, I want to list off for our listeners your LinkedIn archive of your roles at Curology, which I just love.
I
So
could
we
go.
have nurse practitioner to team manager to director of the patient care team to vice president of patient care to senior vice president of patient care to senior vice president of people and patients. So that is a little bit of a windy road and a really exciting trajectory.
Yes, it's been an evolution for sure. And I think
Absolutely.
that's common a little bit in startup world, especially with clinicians who are doing new and different things. That there's not a very good like predetermined path. You become this and then this and then this and then this. It's not linear. And I think in a lot of, especially earlier Series A, Series B startups, you're kind of building the plane and flying it, and you're like, what should this role be? Okay, let's make up this title that feels like it fits.
Yes.
And so that's why I think if you look around, not just me, but other network individuals in the health tech space, you probably see that all the time. And so how that evolved for me at Curology was, like I mentioned from day one, it's kind of like you do anything and everything that's asked of you. And then even more than what's asked of you is the needs that you see. And I think with that, you start to lean into your own strengths, or you start to learn things about yourself that maybe you didn't know before. So there was a few of us that were hired very early, and we all took kind of different tracks. For example, I still have a nurse practitioner who also works with me at Curology, who was hired 2 weeks before I was hired. And her niche has been sitting kind of in between the medical org and our tech and product org. And so she advises on digital product experience. She's very close to the engineering side of things. And like that has been her where she leaned. For me, mine skewed very heavily on the leadership side. I wanted to understand how this business worked. I wanted to know how us as a clinical team, as a really big piece of this organization, can make it be even more successful next month, next year. And just really, I nerded out a lot on the business side of things and understanding revenue, understanding what a P&L was. And I had to Google what
Yes.
a P&L was when it was initially given to me to manage one. So that kind of thing. And so I think a lot of it is there's we as clinicians are continuous learners. And I think that is there will be traits for those of you listening who are thinking about jumping in or feel like you're, so far away from it. How could you possibly get in? There are so many parallels that I continuously use in my role today that were with me as I was at the bedside. Communication being one of them. I mean, you're managing
Absolutely.
complex medical diagnoses, you're managing family dynamics, you're managing an interdisciplinary care team in a lot of cases, and collaborating with other colleagues. Like all of that is also very true. Education. A lot of what you do in a health tech startup as a clinician, working with non clinicians, someone who's on the engineering team or on the finance team, anyone in the organization, you are educating them about your product and your service or whatever it is that you're doing. And so education is always at the forefront of that too. So I started to think about how I could learn more about how the business ticked. And for me, that was learning about how the money flowed too. And as clinicians, I think we're a little bit shy to talk about money and revenue and think like we should just turn a blind eye and not understand how those things work. And that's okay when you're in like a bigger healthcare organization. It's not, you're a little bit farther removed from it. But when you are in a 20-person company, a 50-person company, where there are, everybody and everybody knows you, any little ebb and flow of the business could impact everything one way or the other. And so it really behooves, I think, clinicians who are thinking about going into non-clinical roles in health tech, things like leadership, to learn a bit about how healthcare businesses are run. How does VC work, venture capital? How do these companies that I think are so cool and want to join, how do they do what they do? And so I think there's a lot of learning to be had, and clinicians being continuous learners, very natural learners. Everyone figures out what learning style is best for them. For me, I started to become a student of our own business. And what I did was sit with like our early finance people. I learned from our very early investors and just asked questions and like explain this to me like I'm in kindergarten. And this was pre-chat GPT, when you can ask chat GPT now to like bring those concepts, down to a more manageable level. And along the way, you build relationships. I think that's another big key too for people who are looking to venture into health tech, whether that's in a clinical or non-clinical way, is that, cultivating your network and understanding what others are doing in other companies and other businesses. I remember early on connecting with the lead NP at Pill Club, birth control startup, and being like, let's trade notes. Like, we're not going to reinvent the wheel here. Let's put our heads together to think about how we can make this great for both of our businesses and scale at the same time. So I think there's a lot of that dynamic as well that's a part of my journey. Formal learning courses. I did do a digital executive MBA, which was really interesting and gave me a lot more knowledge about just general business practices. So I think for anyone listening, there's just a lot of different pathways that how you learn best. There's a lot of different options out there, and I'm sure your other guests, Kayla, have been able to share resources as well. But it's an exciting time right now to be thinking about making a change, I think.
I completely and totally agree. I would love, maybe you can send me 3 to 5 of your favorite books or articles. We can include your Substack as well, as great resources for the listeners to kind of like tap into on that path. I wanted to loop back to the idea of asking ChatGPT to answer questions for you and learning just through, ripping through articles. I think a main reason why I even started this podcast was just because no matter how many articles I read, no matter how many books I read, no matter how many, questions I could possibly ask Claude or ChatGPT or anything, and even the brief, DM LinkedIn messages or Slack channel threads that I can get involved in my opinion, and maybe it is just because like I'm a verbal processor. I know that I love to learn by just engaging with humans, which I would bet to think that a lot of clinicians learn that way as we really are communicators first. There is no underestimating the value of putting yourself in front of people, of asking people questions face to face, of asking someone to hop on a Zoom call with you, of just really engaging as a human being with words and actions and a face over relying on more tech resources to get yourself there.
For sure. And that's one of the things that when I get outreach from clinicians that are interested in my journey or just like how clinicians could get involved doing other things, I'm like, it's time to get a little uncomfortable. Gone are the days where you
Yeah.
can go to your states. For me, it's Board of Nursing, the California Association of Nurse Practitioners, like networking dinner where I basically got nothing out of it. I have been able to maximize my digital networking footprint so much with the advent of Zoom and things like that that have become more mainstream over the years little weird to send a cold LinkedIn message like, "Hey, I really admire what you're doing." But, if you're authentic, if you don't use ChatGPT to over engineer what you want to say to people,
Yeah.
we're all a community here in more ways than we think. And so I think you'd find whoever is listening, would find more people willing to take you up on a quick conversation than you find people that will ignore you or say no flat out. And I think that's a really beautiful thing about the medical community, and especially for all of us who are blazing trails that haven't been blazed before. And we're all coming together for the common good of advancing healthcare and advancing patient experience and doing things differently than how we've done them in the past. And so there is absolutely no substitute for learning from the lived experiences of those who have done the thing or are continuing to do the thing. And so wholeheartedly agree that AI has a great place in that, but it's the power of AI and people together that will help further the
Definitely.
learning of everyone.
Yep, completely agreed. Based on your experience, what do you think the split is of getting a job in health tech as a clinician? What is the split? Pure luck versus networking?
I would say most, let me eat my words a tiny bit. Depends what kind of role. I think a pure play clinician role, I think if you have a ton of licenses and you have telehealth experience and you are a great communicator and, various other attributes that I think make a great telehealth clinician, I think that's a little bit easier than, say, applying for a director of clinical operations role when you know no one at the company, you haven't been at the company,
Yeah,
you haven't tried to network with the company. So I think it's split. Depends on so I don't know the exact numbers I would say, but I think it's easier for clinicians looking to go into pure play virtual care versus clinicians who are trying to do uh, various other roles that may not be direct patient care.
yeah, totally makes sense. Totally makes sense. I would definitely venture to guess that the networking side leans much, much, much more heavily for the non-clinical, non-care delivery roles.
Totally. And I've had the opportunity to be able to grow and cultivate and promote a lot of the clinicians that have worked for me at Curology and still work alongside me here today. And it is, I think, a lot of it. I've never actually hired off the street, so to speak, a clinician into a leadership role directly. I've always promoted from within, which has been really, really great because they have that knowledge. They have that understanding of how do I see patients here? How does this team work? How does this business
Yep,
work? How are we trying to do things better? And then a lot of the things in the leadership roles that we have can be learned, like management, people management,
sure.
things like that. So I do think there's also an element of getting your foot in the door by being a virtual care clinician. And then I keep coming back to this example, but like for you saying, I'm going to try to help with the EHR, that's exactly how I think you do some work off the side of your desk for a little while to make things better. And then maybe at some point that crystallizes into a formal role and then role progression, over the years as well.
Yeah, most definitely. On the topic of clinicians working in non clinical roles, both internally at Curology and in the broader landscape of the health tech world, where have you seen, maybe from the start of your career to now, where have you seen clinicians kind of making the biggest impact?
Hmm. It's a great question. I will start all the way at the top with like CEOs and founders. I think there's some good stats around healthcare and healthcare adjacent businesses being not necessarily led as a CEO as much as there is a founding team member who has clinical experience versus there being a
Sure.
startup with co-founders who are maybe technical and then maybe they bring in like a physician who's a startup advisor who maybe works a few hours here and there for them. I think that has definitely the outcomes for those companies are definitely better. And then there's a variety of other things. I think the one that excels the most in my mind is clinical operations. And when I say that, I don't necessarily mean clinical trials because I know clinical operations can mean different things, but I mean how do we help the clinical team run better, more efficiently with higher quality care, which is a huge advantage to the business at large because clinicians tend to be a larger team in a lot of those cases. And so there's a lot of motivation to help things be more efficient, not only for the business, but also for the provider satisfaction as well. How can we cut out some of that administrative work that doesn't necessarily serve them or the patients and really make it a role that they love? So I think that that's the one that I see quite a bit as well. One that I've been seeing a lot more recently is similar to the example I mentioned at Curology, is just especially with the advent of healthcare AI companies, companies that exist with some sort of AI product around healthcare, is that those models need to be trained by clinicians who know
Hmm.
what they're doing. And so there's always a human element of that. So I see a lot of roles posted for things like um, clinical product folks. And when I say clinical product, I mean digital clinical product, and having clinicians help shape that piece of it versus, having people who don't necessarily have the clinical background be driving all of that strategy. So those are some that I think are the more prevalent ones that I see quite a bit now.
That's fantastic insight. Thank you. I was chewing on this kind of question earlier, and I was anticipating that the operational side of things would be really high impact, just because I think one of our strongest assets is really knowing what it is like on the ground, right? And of course, like that can tie into patient experience, that can tie into product development, that can tie into all these things. So having the lived experience of being boots on the ground, delivering care, knowing what it's actually like to work in the medical system has a huge, huge benefit to the operations of a company and how that plays out internally and externally.
Totally. And the people management, like you mentioned there too, is really key because if you have a team of clinicians delivering care, more often than not, they're going to respond really, really well to a manager, a direct manager who has that same level of empathy for what they're going through from an operational standpoint, also people management standpoint. It drives me a little nuts when I see roles posted that are like clinical operations roles. And yet when you look down the list, you see no, not even a preferred clinical credentials or preferred this.
Yeah,
I think it's a mistake sometimes, at least for them to not even consider clinicians that are applying for those roles, because a lot of the skills that they may lack while applying or coming in is teachable. You can't necessarily teach someone, medical school. Going to medical school is what I'm trying to say. That we've already done. We've already done our medical training to a degree. And so that is less easy for us to replicate than it is for us to learn how to manage a corporate budget or how to, work cross functionally with other partners, across a business and things like that. So, yeah, agree.
totally. In the world of highly quickly advancing technology and companies and innovations, it's really easy to get overwhelmed and bogged down by information. What are some of the ways that you like to stay informed in addition to juggling everything else in your life?
Really great question because I definitely have to like parcel out my news coverage, Uh,
It's so
my
hard.
I like want to stay connected with what's going on in the world, but also like cannot be consumed by it all the time.
Yeah.
And same thing with like advances in medical literature and things like that. So staying really current, even though my role is not clinical, I try to stay as much as I can up to date with things that are coming out of major healthcare journals that may be of interest to us at Curology. I always try to think about it through the lens of Curology. How can I take this and work it into whether it's clinical care protocols and working with my medical director on that, or things that could help advance our business strategy that are
Hmm.
great for patients but also great for business. So, trying to stay up to date there. I think also going back to the networking piece, like making sure that I have a few key stakeholder individuals for myself, my own quote personal board of directors. I like to say of people in adjacent roles or adjacent industries or businesses that are, just really interesting to talk to or just to hear what are they experiencing. And so I find that even staying in touch, that way is something that fills my cup and helps me obtain information, new and different information that I might not normally see. And then what I try to do for myself from like a calendaring perspective um, is make sure that I have time carved out intentionally for not only deep work and deep thinking, because I think it can be hard to code switch during the day when you're in 30-minute back-to-back meetings and not being able to think strategically, but also some time to step away from maybe the four walls of whatever business you're working in or whatever company you're working for, to connect, to learn, to research, to think about things a little bit differently versus what's just coming on your plate. Going out and seeking information intentionally versus consuming information that's continuously thrown at you. I think there's a big difference there as far as what we can recall, what we can absorb, and then also what we can action on as well. It's tough. I feel for anyone who's absorbing all the
Yeah,
information that we all are these days. Yeah.
I know. It's really hard. And on a broader scale, not just within, of course, just like you said, within the world of health tech, like the world is so overwhelming and we are getting just bombarded with information all the time and not always information that is productive or like helpful to be being fed. Something that you mentioned was I felt like it was so wise was carving time out in your calendar to seek information. And I think you called it like kind of deep work. What is a practical example of this? Like, what's an example of something that maybe you've done in the past couple months that was really, beneficial or powerful for you?
Yes, great question. I think it's really about, for me, when I think about deep work, I think about strategy work. I spend some time during my days with very short-term, things that are happening in the moment, or someone needs something to talk to me about today that has to be decided on by the end of the day. Very like more micro types of things. And I never want to lose sight of what the macro is. How does it all tie together? And so I'm constantly thinking and also teaching those who work alongside me to think like, how does this ladder up to what we're trying to achieve as an organization? I think we all get a little bogged down by what needs to be done in the next half hour, the next hour, the next like 24 hours. And so often leaders, and I say leaders broadly, leaders can mean anyone can be a leader. Leadership is an attribute that you have, not necessarily a title that you have. And so leaders will think a little bit further ahead than the next 24 hours. And so for me, that's looking at things like hiring plans. Like, what are my business goals this year? What is Curology trying to achieve? And how can I, from a people perspective, ensure that we're set up for success, that we have the right talent in place? What does that look like over the next several months? That's not a today thing. That's a, what are we going to do in a month, 3 months, 6 months? So I think that that's a great example. I think a more clinical example is, what are the types of things we want to do that we're not doing today? So we treat a very specific set of things at Curology. We always have. We've been very much squarely in the derm space, where as a lot of competitors have become, more jacks of all trades. We've stayed very squarely to our roots, and we do what we do best, which is derm, and we will likely stick in that direction for the most part. But what else could we do? What else? How else could we serve patients? And that requires some deep thinking to think about, how are we set up today? What do we think we could achieve in our model? How long would it take us to get there? Those are things you can't do in a 30-minute meeting, more or less, when you're thinking about 10 other things. So I think it's really important for all leaders of all, backgrounds, of all teams, to challenge themselves to think bigger and think more long term, because it can be hard in a startup environment that's working pretty quickly.
Totally. Those are great takeaways. And I too struggle sometimes too. I mean, I think that there's value to even doing that in your personal life. Of course, in a professional life, but absolutely in your personal life as well. And just taking time to be like, okay, well, I can think 1 week ahead. I can think 2 months ahead. But what are we doing when we think about a couple years ahead? What are we doing when we even think about 1 year ahead? So much can change. And how do we think now about tomorrow and the future that we can get ready and stay ready. On the topic of personal life, I would love to dive away from our usual kind of script and talk a little bit about motherhood. It's a big, passion for you, I think, is talking about the balance of career and motherhood. And I think that this is the perfect opportunity to shine a spotlight on our listeners who are mothers or who are thinking about being mothers. As women, we face a lot of challenges in regards to how do we balance a career with another full-time career. And I would love to hear your insights from navigating that yourself and how you have found success balancing it today.
Sure. That's a question and a topic I love very much. Motherhood for me was always something I knew I wanted to do, knew that I wanted it to be a part of my life, but I knew that I didn't want it to be my whole life or my whole
Yeah.
identity, even though I love my children very dearly. I've got 2 boys. And so it hit me like a ton of bricks. And I didn't, even being pregnant with my first, I was not loving pregnancy. I didn't like, even thinking about, what was going to happen once the baby came. But I knew that I needed this to be part of my story. And I say that not to
Yeah.
be negative, but I say that to hopefully appeal to folks who may be feeling the same way or have had those feelings and just validate that because it's not all sunshine and roses. Although I wouldn't trade my kids for the world. And so I joined Curology before I became a mom. And so I was able to dedicate 1 million hours to my work because it didn't feel like work. It still doesn't feel like work. It's because I love what I do. But that definitely shifted when I became a parent. And then when I became a parent again for the second time, my time management had to shift dramatically in terms of what can I do? I have this amount of time. I have this other human that requires a few things of me that I need to get to. Like, how can I balance all the things? How can I lean on my support system? I don't have any family here in Southern California because I'm from the East
Hmm.
Coast. And so we definitely had to carve out and create a village, that was able to support us and us support them. I'm so fortunate to be part of an organization at Curology we have a large population of working parents, moms and dads, birthing parents of all kinds. And so we also have found that community within our community of, I was able to
Yeah.
send on Slack, especially my first, like, oh my gosh, does someone know what this is? A team of clinicians, a lot whom have, seen peds derm in their past as well. I'm like, what rash am I looking at right now, my
Yeah.
child? I
Yeah.
can't be a clinician, mom. So it's definitely a very interesting transition. My kids are a little bit older now, and so I'm able to look back on that fondly. I do want to say for anyone listening who's, maybe been struggling on this journey, really wants this to be a part of your story, but for whatever reason it hasn't happened yet, just know that you're not alone. That is such a common thing that occurs, and no matter how common it is, each individual experience is so different. And so I know how difficult that can be to listen to things like this and think about it. But motherhood is definitely a trip, especially in startup life. And so I really had to
Hmm.
think about like an integration. I was fed a lot of
Mm.
stories about work-life balance, home life balance, work-life balance. I don't think that may be a provocative statement, but I don't think the balance part of that truly exists. I think we are one being, and we are integrating our professional lives and our personal lives at different intersection points because there's only 24 hours in a day. And so I really had to think about with my slice of, my pizza pie of time, like what
Yeah.
size are those slices going to be today? What are they going to be tomorrow? What are they going to be the next day? And they look different every single day. But yeah, motherhood has been a trip for sure. And like you said, it is one of my favorite topics to talk about.
Yeah. I love what you just said about thinking about things as an integration rather than like two opposite ends, like really thinking about it like a pizza pie, and how these things blend together.
You know how to learn that, honestly, because you again with mainstream media or all these things you read, not just for parents but for anybody with work life balance, like, yeah, and especially in a startup environment, this is not a none of the startups you're ever going to work for are 9 to 5, and if they say that, it's not true.
Yeah.
You really, and I truly believe, if you're aligned with the mission and you're aligned with the work, the longer hours or the off hours work does not truly feel like a grind or feel like work. It feels like, it's a mission that you're working towards. But that doesn't mean that, you can't go to a workout class or, see travel and see family and friends. It all blends together. And so I like to
Yes,
lead
it
that
does.
way as well with my teams and then also my colleagues.
Yeah. Wow. Thanks, Laura. Any last pieces of nuggets of wisdom that you have dropped so gracefully throughout our conversation?
I think I'm fresh out of wisdom, but what I will say is not that I think I had too much in the first place, but I just want to say thank you to you because I love what you're doing. I love, the light that you're shining on various types of clinicians and journeys and the conversations that you're bringing to light. So just a big thank you to you for having this conversation and also all the ones that you have had so far.
Yeah, thank you so much. It really, I think just like you said, like it doesn't feel like work. It is truly something that I really believe in, and I'm having so much fun doing it. I think that the only ways that I have a sort of like finger on the pulse of is this a success is number one, is it giving me energy? And number two, has it helped like one person? And I had the first time of like really having a random person telling me that it helped them within the past week or so. So I was like, I could stop the show now and it would be complete. Like I've done my work. But thankfully, I'm just going to keep keeping on. So thank you for that. I really appreciate it.
Of course. Thank you for having me.
Yes. All right. Well, if any of the listeners want to learn more about you or reach out to you, can you share some ways that they can read your work or get in touch with you?
Sure, absolutely. You can, welcome to connect with me on LinkedIn. I'm sure Kayla will put the link in the show notes as well. And then, as she mentioned, I do have a Substack for health tech clinicians, born out of just helping others land different kinds of telehealth roles and things. And one of my favorite pastimes is keeping a pulse on what's happening in the health tech industry and just interesting things that are going on there. So we'll link that in the show notes for you guys as well.
Yes, ma'am. Well, thank you so much again for sharing your time and wisdom and energy with me. I really, really, really appreciate it. And I'm sure that our listeners do as well. Listeners, if you'd like to get in touch with me, all of my links will be in the show notes. Thanks for listening to another episode of Corporate Espionage. Be sure to follow, like, subscribe, give us 5 stars wherever you listen to podcasts, and send it to a clinician who might be interested or intrigued. And we will see you on the next episode. Thanks again.